Okay, well, we're at 2:01, and I think we can get started. I'm sure others will join in due time. Thanks again for being with us today. My name is Danielle Aragoni. I'm Managing Director for Policy and Solutions here at National Housing Trust, where I get to work with this great team to bring you content on a pretty regular basis so that you all can be as well poised, well positioned as possible to make good use of inflation reduction. In that manner, we have a good lineup again today, which I'm happy about. Including some program updates from Todd Nedwick, who you'll hear from shortly, with some kind of up to the latest news about the potential shutdown and some of the implications that might have for IRA programs. We'll hear from our partners over at National Council for State Housing Agencies. Robert Henson is with us today to talk about the resources from them. And then we're going to do kind of a deep dive on QAPs. And I know that you all, critical tool this is for your work and for our work to advance affordable housing. We're going to share with you some of the results of work that we've been doing over the last several months to examine what's kind of the state of QAPs across the country and what that really means for how well positioned some states are to access Inflation Reduction Act type funds, and what tweaks could be made potentially, or tweaks could be considered to further get towards that goal. We'll certainly learn, as we always do, from some of the HFAs here on the call. So thanks in advance to Ohio and BC and Minnesota for sharing, and then we'll wrap it up with some updates from Madeline. So with that, I'm going to turn it over first to Todd.
Great. Thanks, Danielle. And hi, everyone. So wanted to just start off, we have been getting some questions about what the potential impact of the government shutdown might be on IRA implementation. Last I heard, and I've been trying to check the news feeds, there still isn't a deal to avert a shutdown, and that will obviously have serious consequences for the economy and for people's lives. In terms of the Inflation Reduction Act, it looks like the shutdown will not cause work on IRA to cease. There might be some disruptions, but there will not be a complete stop to the work. And that's because through the IRA, agencies receive multi-year funding from Congress. So these programs are not funded through annual appropriations. They were funded through the budget reconciliation process, which was a multi-year funding appropriation. We are looking at specific federal agencies and what their contingency plans indicate specifically about IRA. For example, the Department of Energy says that they have over 1,000 employees funded by IRA in the bipartisan implementation law, and so infrastructure law, and so those employees are able to continue to perform work. HUD has said that GRP applications will go forward; they can still be submitted. However, HUD staff support will not be available during the shutdown, and HUD will also not be able to review the applications that they get until the shutdown is over. And then for EPA and Treasury and IRS, we just haven't seen any official contingency plans yet. I've included here 2 links to the 2 contingency plans for DOE and HUD, which will provide updated information, and we'll be happy to share those links out. Next slide. So the other program update I wanted to share relates to the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program. So HUD has issued the first awards under the Elements cohort of the GARP. And just a reminder for folks, the Elements cohort supports current recapitalization transactions and funds efficiency and resiliency investments for projects that are in the final stages of the recapitalization process. And so HUD announced recently 28 awards through this first round. You'll see how those awards are distributed across the states in the table. A total of $17.9 million was awarded through this round. The average award amount was just over $666,000. So that's pretty close with the $750,000 maximum per property award under the NOFO. And it looked like the amount of awards that HUD made is far less than what they were planning to make this first round. My understanding is that HUD had intended to um, make awards totaling about $35 million in this first round. And so that what they've actually funded is about half of what they were expecting to fund. So that's interesting, and not sure yet if that's because they just haven't received, the amount of applications they were expecting, or if applications didn't meet the minimum requirements. Obviously, want to learn more about that going forward. Next slide. And then I wanted to share some late breaking news. This actually was announced this morning that Treasury and IRS have announced the application process for the low-income communities bonus credit program under the Section 48 ITC. They announced that applications will begin being accepted for the bonus credit on October 19th. And there will be a 30-day application period followed by a rolling application review period. And DOE will review applications and provide recommendations to the IRS as in the order that applications are received. So there's not too much additional information in terms of the actual application requirements. There'll be a webinar on Friday that kind of goes into what's required in depth. There's a DOE landing page where materials are posted, the actual text of the regulation, and all of the application material will be posted. I checked that landing page today, and it doesn't look like it's updated yet with the actual application material. And then there's also a list of covered multifamily programs. So for that category of low income, of solar that is installed as part of a low income multifamily building, there is a list of federal programs for which properties are eligible for the credit bonus. So we will send out the links to all of this information and keep you updated as we learn more. With that, I think I'll pass it back to Danielle.
Great, thank you. And I should say on that list of elements cohort grantees, there were a few states that had quite a few awards, including Maryland and I think New York. If you on the line here happen to have been in touch with any of the owners that are beneficiaries of that, I realize they're at a different phase of the process. But if you have any insights as to how that's being received in your states, how the owners, what the owners intend to do with it, please feel free to drop that in the chat. Now I'm really happy to turn over the stage for a few minutes to Robert Henson. As you know, NCSHA has been a very close partner to NHT in implementing this bootcamp series, and maybe how you heard about it, the series in the first place. So Robert is here to share with us some new news out of NCSHA, a little bit of a preview of what you can expect to hear at the conference in a couple weeks, but I'll turn it over to Robert.
Thanks, Danielle, and to the rest of the team at NHT. Thank you. Thank you so much for continuing to put these sessions on. I know they're really helpful. So as Danielle alluded to, I wanted to give folks just a little bit of a preview of some research that we've been working on for the past several months. Some of you are very aware of this because your agencies may have been the subject of specific targeted case studies included in this research. But earlier this year, when we were still sort of trying to wrap our heads around the full sort of scope of all of these programs and what they might mean for HFAs, NCSHA engaged with some outside consultants. We really just kind of wanted to take stock of HFA's involvement in sort of energy efficiency or resilience activities to date. And then looking back to see what HFAs have already done, and then sort of look forward to what opportunities these programs would ultimately present HFAs to continue or to begin that kind of work. And it was kind of an interesting exercise because, as you've seen from these boot camps and from other communications from us and NHT and others, these programs have really sort of come into existence and into they've come to life sort of before our very eyes over the past several months as the NOFOs have gone out and the RFIs and the various forms of program guidance that really sort of flesh out what these programs actually mean, translate from the underlying statute of the IRA to actually getting these dollars into projects in affordable housing around the country. So like I said, kind of looking back, took stock of sort of the state of affairs, and found, that a number, 16 HFAs already administered weatherization assistance programs. Some 21 agencies have, really strong preferences in their QAPs, as we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then we found that, there were at least 20 HFAs that already sort of administered a specialty boutique kind of energy efficiency subsidy or financing programs. And these were really targeted to both owner-occupied and rental properties in their state. And so with that kind of background knowledge of what HFAs were already doing, we sort of picked a few states. We picked 8, actually, HFAs to have our consultants at Apt Associates. And again, some of you are probably on this call and were subject to their probing and to their inquiries, to kind of analyze across a couple of different axes, the sorts of programs that HFAs have already engaged in, many of which sort of look a lot like what is going to now be what is now being implemented on the national level. And so these programs really sort of run the gamut from, again, that sort of, very clear preferences in the QAP. One state had, already had a rebate program in place, an home energy rebate program in place, very similar to what DOE is now implementing. There were sort of tailored weatherization programs, sustainable trust funds for energy efficiency purposes. There's just a whole bunch of different things in these sort of 8 case studies that are really sort of tangible examples of what HFAs have been doing, and also I think really relate to sort of what the IRA is going to be doing and what HFAs will be doing with some of that funding. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from these case studies. And then in conjunction with the case studies, sort of looking back, we do have the other component of this report is an actual sort of opportunities assessment of the full sort of panoply of IRA programs, kind of looking at them from a very narrowly targeted sort of HFA lens, as opposed to perhaps a more broader sort of affordable housing lens. This is really focused on the role that HFAs may end up playing in many of these programs, and we're in fact seeing a lot of this sort of play out in real time, which again is very interesting. It's sort of both a challenging time to engage in this kind of analysis, but also a really interesting time to sort of see the results in real time. So that's sort of a summary. I will say all of your executive directors at all of your agencies should have received sort of preliminary copies of this report. We are planning to release it sort of more generally to the public on Friday, and there will be an announcement in our weekly newsletter about that. So it'll be open, and available to anybody that would like to take a look at it. And then, as Daniel alluded to, there's going to be a couple of sessions at our upcoming conference in Boston, annual conference, related to some of these programs. We'll have both an actual panel discussion related to energy efficiency and resilience. We will have a separate community meetup we're going to have a new sort of NCSHA community group dedicated to energy efficiency and resilience issues. So that'll be just an HFA audience only, just, us, just HFAs. And then NHT is also, as I think you're aware, is going to be having their own event there as well, to discuss some of these issues in their own capacity. So really excited about this report and this research and putting it out into the world, and hopefully it'll be informative and help sort of shape HFA's engagement with these programs on a national level, looking at what some of your peers have done on a state level in the past. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to Danielle or whoever's next, unless there are any questions.
Thanks, Robert. Do you happen to know off the top of your head when those sessions are, the efficiency one?
Yes, so they're all on the NCSHA annual conference agenda. So let's see, real quickly, the energy efficiency community meetup will be on the first Sunday, October 15th. And that's going to be from 1 p.m. to 2:15 p.m. And then the actual panel discussion on energy efficiency is going to be, let's see, that's going to be on Tuesday, October 17th at 10 a.m. And like I said, I'll just go ahead and drop the agenda into the chat if that's okay, and you can see all of these sessions there.
That's perfect. Yeah, thank you. That makes it easy for people to book their time. And it's going to be busy few days there in Boston. Great. Thank you, Robert. And we look forward to seeing the full report. We'll look for that email on Friday, and maybe we'll include it if you can later in the update from us as well, just to make sure everybody gets it. All right, let's move ahead. Next slide. I think that the next chunk of our time together here is really to share with you what we've learned through our own QAP analysis. As we said at the top, and you know very well, these documents really do shape a lot of the development that ends up happening. What we've seen, and I think what Robert alluded to as well, is that work that's done at the state level to anticipate some of these investments that are now coming online really positions them very well, and they're very well to take advantage of them. So in that same vein, since 2017, we've been looking at QAPs and sort of examining what are some of the trends that we see in energy efficiency requirements and incentives in QAPs. We published our first report in that year and updated it in 2021. And we've just completed our latest review of 2023 QAPs. This time, in addition to looking at energy requirements and incentives, we also expanded our scope to include some other metrics and standards like tenant protection, housing preservation, digital equity, and more. So in the months ahead, you'll be seeing some of that, those insights flow out from NHT. But we want to kind of give you the first peek at what we learned on the climate and energy side. So be looking for more information to come from us in the coming weeks. But I'm really happy now to turn it over to Mohat Kapoor, who's part of the team who reviewed these QAPs, which was, as you well know, is not an easy task, and it's the analysis that we're sharing today. So Mohat.
Great, thanks, Danielle. So as you mentioned, NHT, we've looked at a number of elements in our QAP analysis that we began earlier this year. And one of those elements of energy efficiency that we've been tracking for several years is also one of the most popular ways that agencies are requiring or incentivizing energy efficiency in their QAPs, and that's third-party building standards, which is on the slide. So we've listed out here 6 of the most popular building standards that we have seen in QAPs. You can see there's the 2017 numbers that we were tracking, and then now updated to include the 2023 numbers. And each of these third-party building standards also includes a number of requirements within them, whether it's better use of energy or water, building standards, or other specific components, to name a few. And from our analysis, you can see there's a huge number of agencies that are including third-party building standards, and we've seen this significant increase. And it's really only a handful of allocating agencies that we've found in our analysis that don't actually mention or include any sort of third-party building standards within their QAP. So these numbers that you can see on the graph, they are cumulative mentions of a specific building standard within the QAP, and that includes both new construction and rehab preservation. Though obviously we'll clarify though that some states may have different requirements or levels of certification that they incentivize or require for either new construction projects or rehab preservation projects. Noting that, even, for example, like within LEED, there's like the various levels of certification that you can achieve. A few other quick little points that I'll mention. There's a little text box about Energy Star. So we weren't specifically tracking this data in 2017, which is why we've sort of pulled it out separately. But wanted to, make mention and note of this in today's conversation, specifically because, as I think Todd will speak about a little further, Energy Star is, related to some of the IRA-related resources that HFA is accessing. I'll also mention that the International Living Futures category, that includes Living Buildings Challenge as part of that. And I know even, we internally had some questions about the Zero Energy Ready Homes certification. And you'll see that there are only 10 states that are including that certification within their QAP, either as a requirement or an incentive. But what I will mention is that there are a number of states that we haven't included in this graph that do either incentivize or require Zero Energy Ready Homes, but that's outside of the QAP, so really outside of the scope of work that we're looking at right now. And some other states may also allow sort of a tier or sort of a third-party building standard certification, within the Zero Energy Ready Home. So, I know some states might require enterprise green communities, and to achieve a certain level of that, you may subsequently achieve that through getting a Zero Energy Ready Homes. But unless it's sort of been pulled out specifically and separately, that's something that we haven't. So I know we're sort of holding questions until the end, so happy to answer any questions. But for now, I will pass it over to Laura to dive into the next topic.
Great, thanks, Moha. Next slide. Oh, perfect, thanks. So as Moha mentioned, third-party building standards are a really popular way that we see in a lot of QAPs for integrating energy efficiency and sustainability into QAPs. The next potential element of a QAP we want to highlight is benchmarking, and this is a lot less common. Only 11 states currently are including benchmarking as part of their QAP. We'll dig into that a little bit. But I want to make sure I want to set some groundwork and talk about what benchmarking even is, just because it is so less common. So benchmarking is the practice of tracking actual energy and/or water consumption data on a specific property, with the idea that it can then be compared against other similar buildings. And there's a couple of different reasons to even think about doing benchmarking and the benefits of benchmarking. One is the information can be really valuable to building owners by knowing what energy is being consumed by a building. They can make data-driven decisions that can improve operations and maintenance. They can make decisions about improvements that can lower operating costs on their property, et cetera. It can also be really useful information for the agency to have, so for all of you to have, so that then you can understand what the energy and water consumption looks like portfolio-wide. And that will allow you all to make informed policy decisions about what level of energy and water consumption you want to see, and make policies that will drive it in that direction. So what you don't see here on this slide is a comparison to our previous analysis. But in 2017, the first year we started looking at this, there were only 6 states who were incentivizing or requiring energy and water benchmarking. And we've seen a small, but a jump in the number of states who are including this in their QAP. And in our most recent analysis, there are 11 total states that are incorporating benchmarking, and that's 10 who are including it as a requirement, and 1 state that incentivizes benchmarking. And like everything in the QAP, you all know this, not all benchmarking is the exact same between states. It's not all created equal. So where we see the most variation in benchmarking between states is for the length of time during which an owner is being asked to benchmark, asked to report the data about energy consumption. At a minimum, we see it as a one-time only analysis, collect that data once and then you're done. Sometimes we see it, for 5 years, you have to continuously do that benchmarking up through the entirety of the compliance period. So there is some variation even within the 11 states that are incorporating benchmarking. And there are various tools to actually do and report the benchmarking, the most popular of which is the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. We saw that in many of the states that are captured here in the 11. So if benchmarking is just collecting the data, and next slide, please, Madeline, you might be asking what you even do with that data once you have it. So this slide, we're talking about energy performance and how that's being integrated into qualified allocation plans. So again, want to talk not just about the trends that we're seeing, but make sure that we have a baseline understanding of what it is that we're talking about. So the energy performance-based approach requires setting a target for reduced energy consumption compared to an actual baseline. So in rehab, this baseline is a comparison to the building pre-retrofit, so before it goes through that process. And for new construction, it's a comparison to state building energy efficiency standards. So there is a slight difference there between new construction and preservation in terms of what that baseline is to which we're comparing. And the target then can be either a percentage reduction in energy consumption or a specific HERS index score. And the HERS index score measures a property's energy efficiency. And I always forget this piece of it, but the lower rating, the lower HERS rating actually indicates a more energy efficient property. But those are the 2 ways we can think about it, either as a percentage reduction in percentage of energy consumption, or the actual HERS rating that measures energy efficiency. So here, again, we see a lot of states distinguishing between new construction and rehab. And in new construction, in 2013, in our most recent analysis, 14 states are requiring an energy performance approach, and 9 states incentivize it. And on average for new construction, QAPs are looking for a 20% reduction in energy consumption, excuse me. And again, that's compared to the state building energy efficiency standards. So some states require more than 20% reduction, some states require less than 20% reduction, but on average for new construction, the QAPs are looking for a 20% reduction in actual energy consumption. And when using the HERS rating, the average requirement for new construction is 66.7. Again, some are having a higher number, some have a lower number, but it averages out right there to 66.7. And then on rehab, we have 15 states, or rehab and preservation, I should say, 15 states require the energy performance approach and 7 states are incentivizing it. And on average, looking for a 30% reduction in energy usage. And again, that's compared to the property before, it goes through rehab and retrofit, or a HERS rating of 79.5. And we heard about third-party building standards from MOHA, and in some instances, energy performance is already incorporated into some of these energy performance standards. For the purposes of this slide and the numbers that I'm sharing here, we've only considered an outside standalone mention of energy performance standards. So if a state includes a third-party building standard that incorporates energy performance or benchmarking, we have not captured those here. We're only when it's pulled out separately from those third-party building standards. So that's it on energy performance and actual energy consumption. But the next question would be, how are QAPs considering the actual sources of the energy that we're consuming? So for that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Madeline.
Thanks, Laura. So from our analysis in 2017 to 2023, we saw an additional 15 states add renewable energy, whether it's a requirement or a point incentive into their QAP. And these states all approach renewable energy in their own way, whatever works best for their climate and for their state and for their developers. So of the 23 states QAPs, 10 require renewable energy in some capacity, whether it's solar panels, like in DC, or having the building be solar ready. And then 13 states have incentives for renewable energy. We see that in the percentage of energy from the building being offset by renewable energy, like in Connecticut and Rhode Island with their PV systems for common areas. And we also see states that are encouraging and awarding developers points if they're able to bring the renewable energy benefits directly to the tenants, whether it's a dollar amount required per unit, or just encouraging the benefits to reach tenants and utility savings. And the types of renewable energy that are pretty common across the QAPs, 21 states explicitly call out solar, 2 states with wind, and 2 states with geothermal. And then the big push that's coming through is electrification. With electrification, we see it either as a requirement or an incentive across 8 different states. The common ways that electrification is being pushed in QAPs differs between new construction and rehab. For new construction, it is a lot of just developing new, obviously, with electric systems, whether it's heating and cooling, hot water, heat pumps, and then appliances like electric stoves, cooktops, ranges. For rehab, it's point incentives for converting from gas systems to all electric systems. Also point incentives for the appliances and rehabs, hot water, heating and cooling. And while this technically isn't considered electric, it's become a presence in QAPs. It's the EV wave. So right now we saw that 7 states are either awarding points for projects with EV charging stations, or they're requiring projects to be EV ready. So we'll continue to track that as that becomes more present in QAPs. So to see how these different QAP elements might be supported by IRA funding, I'll pass it over to Todd, who can talk more about that.
Great, thanks, Madeline. Yeah, so now that we've kind of outlined some of the sustainability trends that we're seeing, we wanted to discuss how these trends align with the policy and programmatic goals of the IRA programs. We've shared a lot of information about the IRA programs over the last several months. And so here's a very high-level summary of each program and how the programs align with some of those QAP elements that we just discussed. And I'm not going to go through each column, but I'm hoping that this is a helpful resource to you all that you can refer to later. But I do want to point out some examples of how these IRA programs can support developers and HFAs in achieving sustainability outcomes. For example, we heard from Laura that a number of HFAs are requiring or incentivizing improved energy performance above baseline levels. And several IRA programs focused on energy efficiency have minimum performance requirements. For example, through the GARP, HUD expects awardees to achieve at least a minimum of 25% energy savings. And the DOE Home Energy Efficiency Program requires a minimum 20% energy savings and encourages savings above 35% through higher incentives. And then another example, Moha shared the trends in third-party building standards, including the number of HFAs that incorporate zero energy ready home and Energy Star standards. And the 45L tax credit provides, as of right, $500 to $2,500 for Energy Star certification and $1,000 to $5,000 for zero energy ready home certification, depending on whether labor standards are met. So those are resources that developers can access based on the Energy Star certification requirements in your agency's QAPs. Next slide. And then looking at renewable energy and electrification, 3 IRA programs will provide funding to support electrification, GERP, the DOE High Efficiency Electric Appliance Rebate Program, as well as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And similarly for renewable energy, you see 3 programs here that are providing funding or tax credits to advance renewable energy. So, looking at this, one of the questions that surfaces for me is how might HFAs go about leveraging these program resources by aligning their LIHTC priorities with the goals of the IRA programs, and sort of what barriers exist that might make that challenging. So we wanted to have a discussion about that, and to get things started, we've asked several of you to share how your agency is approaching that question and what has been learned in the process. So I will turn it over to Sean Thomas from the Ohio Housing Finance Agency to share a little bit about his agency's experience.
Sean, it looks like we're having a little trouble hearing you. No, it's not showing on my end, unless it's just me.
Yeah, I can't hear it.
Still not coming through.
Okay, well, maybe while Sean is getting that worked out, we can turn it over to Joe from the DC Department of Housing and Community Development.
I guess I can go first. That works. So for DC is a little unique in kind of a lot of ways, but we sort of act as city, county, state all in one. So with that, we've been sort of going first, I guess I would say, in terms of the district has implemented the country's first building energy performance standard. And so that's pushed us sort of on this path already of having to do a lot of the work to comply with the law. And so that set us up to a position where we can now look at, we already have buildings that we know in our portfolio are going to be developed to a particular standard. So how do we turn around now and specifically tie those standards to the funding that's coming from the IRA? So with the 45L credit, all new construction in the district in terms of a threshold needs to be EGC plus, which includes the zero energy ready home standard. So what we've already started doing is, since that's a threshold, is amending our LIHTC commitments as well as our
testing.
Oh, hey, Sean. So amending our LIHTC covenants as well as our commitments for gap financing to include requirements to pursue those credits, as well as to pursue all solar credits, including the enhanced solar credits that were just announced today. So the idea would be for us to be able to adjust downward our HPTF amount, or potentially state tax credit awards or other competitive financing to account for the upcoming credits that could be available to projects. And then looking forward, it's sort of, we now require solar to be installed on all of our projects, and are starting to increase the standard over time of so that projects can avoid liability that's attached to our building energy performance standards. And so that alignment now, when we're talking to our state energy agency about funding, we have a portfolio that we can specifically pinpoint the expected installed, what they're going to install, and what the standard will be, and be able to calculate how much of the IRA funds we can use to help them when they're looking to apply for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, for other grants. We have a ready pipeline of projects that are expecting and can use those funds as they apply.
Great, thanks, Joe. And we're gonna have folks share, and then we will have some time for Q&A. Okay, Sean, it sounds like your audio is working. So do you wanna go next?
It is. Sorry, Joe. It's not my day with technology. And I was just saying, like, we had incentive points for the GRRP with HUD with our preservation projects. And we got some feedback from the developers, and it was good feedback that our points were our language was too general. So they're telling us like the elements projects only don't fit because the elements have to have already financing in place. So we have to go back and adjust our language to make sure it says leading edge or comprehensive GRP. So we're in the process of doing that. So that's it's not a great story, but that's it, I guess. Hopefully get some projects next year. And our QAP is a 2-year QAP, so maybe 2025. I think this program is gonna be around that long. So we'll see.
Thanks, Sean.
Sure.
Next, I'll turn it over to Catherine from Minnesota Housing, and I think Catherine, we have some slides from you, right?
Yeah, but I'll be
No.
brief.
That's fair. Thanks.
Awesome. So I'm Catherine Teichen with Minnesota Housing. I'm just going to chat a little bit about the energy rebate analysis requirement that we have. So this is a requirement that we've had in place for quite a while, 8 years now. And the purpose is to specifically to leverage utility funds to kind of increase energy efficiency. So for this requirement, we're asking developers both to list their energy rebates that they are eligible for as a source in the workbook, and then also to provide supplemental documentation in the application. And that there's no standard form that we're requiring, so it looks a little bit different depending on what utility, what developer. When we first started this requirement, there was a lot of, I think, technical assistance we did with developers, a lot of educating them on, do their projects, are they available for kind of commercial utility rebates or residential utility rebates or custom utility rebates? Should they be doing prescriptive programs, or, how should they be working with their utilities? And I think we've come a long way. We are in discussions about kind of with the new federal rebate programs. Are we going to have that be like its own line in the workbook and its own application requirement? Are they going to be combined together? But we have communicated out to our developers to anticipate also that these rebate programs are going to be available, and they'll be expected to be looking at them and using all available rebates. You can go to the next slide, Madeline. I'm not going to go through all this language. I just included it as a backup for anybody who wanted to look at it later, but it's the language we use about what exactly we require. We ask them to, at the application phase, give like a preliminary estimate, but then we acknowledge that things may change, designs may change. So then prior to closing is when we ask them to give kind of a more final source. And next slide. And then this is just to kind of get a sense of where we're at for utility rebates. This is just an application. So this is when they're initially going in, initially doing these estimates. You'll see, they've gone in terms of kind of totals, they've been pretty steady over the last 8 years, maybe a slight decline. I think where we found that issue to be is that I think initially developers were coming in really high, really strong, trying to get every rebate that they thought they were eligible for. And then some of those rebates didn't materialize. And so now we're seeing developers be a little bit more conservative because they have to bridge those rebates. And if they list a rebate that they don't actually end up getting, then they have to cover that cost differential. So I think we're seeing a little bit more conservative numbers than we were at the beginning. And that's all I've got.
Thank you, Catherine. So now we want to open it up to folks. If you have any questions for Joe, Sean, or Catherine about what they shared, or if you want to share any sort of insights from your work, and how you're thinking about kind of aligning your tax credit program with some of these IRA resources. Mic is open for folks to share or ask questions.
I'll jump in here, Todd. Oh, I don't have my video on, apologies. Only to say there was a really good question from Catherine in the chat about what we even mean when we use the term QAP. Should have clarified that from the beginning, that we mean all sort of like accompanying QAP documents as well, not just the standalone qualified allocation plan, but we look at the, application, the design standards, developer guides. It varies, as you all know, state to state, what those are called or what they are. We look at all of those. We do not look at like state code. I put as an example of something that we don't look at, something outside of the housing credit program, but that housing credit properties and all other properties in the state might have to meet those requirements. We don't consider those documents.
Thanks, Laura. And I should add, if there are any questions as well about what you heard from our QAP research, please feel free to share those as well.
So there's a question in the chat from Emily that I think is for me, which is at the initial application stage, what level of evaluation are you doing? Basically none. So the level of evaluation is just, did they put it as a source in their workbook? Did they list something in the documentation that indicates that they've talked to the utility company and where their rebate sources are coming from? We do reach out. We do have our underwriters reach out if there's something like, this is blatantly like cannot be correct. So if it's new construction that says that they don't think they're going to qualify for any energy rebates, like that's just probably not reasonable. Or if they are indicating that, just something that seems very out of the box. But if it's like relatively reasonable, we're not checking to see, is there $1,000 discrepancy or a $500 discrepancy or something? It's kind of only reaching out and doing follow-up if it's something blatantly unreasonable.
So I'll jump in on that too. So we have a rebate program and it's similar to that, and it's about $20,000. So it's really like not moving the needle as much as the credits are. So our underwriting and application does make sure, like if you have a solar system, we've now with the change as part of the IRA to how to calculate, the credits are generating basis, or the panels are generating both basis and the ITC. So that's something that we've now integrated into our QAP to require projects to show at application that how the panel ownership occurs, so that they can claim the eligible basis and the ITC, as well as then an expectation that they would pursue the additional credits. So we're asking them to show at least that ownership and to show the ITC. So we've integrated like a green building section into our model that the groups are submitting. And then we're reviewing that to confirm the ownership structure for the panels aligns so that they can claim that credit. Just because it's a lot larger amount in the district than other places. We have a very, very, very rich SREC market. So our projects can typically get 25%, like basically more than the cost of the panels back as a source. So we're really tracking it very specifically at the beginning.
Any other questions that folks might have, or anyone want to share how their agency is thinking about kind of aligning the tax credit process with the IRA program?
Yeah, and maybe if I could just piggyback on that, Todd. I mean, one of the things that this is making me wonder about is in the most recent QAP changes that you all have made in your own states, are there any of the provisions that we've talked about or other ones that we haven't talked about that you feel are moving your owners toward delivering more sustainable, resilient, affordable housing? Or what did you wish you could get done that you couldn't get done? Don't be shy. We know there's a lot of QAP stories to tell here.
So I'll just jump in and say that in previous versions of our QAP, we had points in there for cost containment. And so if you got cost containment points, you were obviously more likely to get selected. We found those to be very much at odds with trying to do some of the sustainability work that we wanted to do. And so when we got rid of the cost containment points, we found that our developers it was much easier for them to be able to invest in some of these clean energy programs.
Yeah, it costs a hell of a lot more.
Good point. Thank you. Diane, what's the status in your state? Have you seen efforts been floated that weren't successful, or do you all get pushback when you try to make changes in your QAPs anyway? Specifically on the cost issue. I'm looking at Mia's comment here too. One piece of nuance is if you have a state with a strict energy code, as we have in Vermont, we found it fairly difficult to stay ahead of the code performance standards and not make it cost prohibitive. Yeah, do you want to say a little bit more about that? What has been your where have you landed on that issue from a policy perspective?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that a little bit. And I'm not on our development team, so I have not been involved as much in the nuts and bolts of how that sort of shakes out. But we have a state energy efficiency utility that does a lot of the utility work. So it's a collaborative high performance building standard, and we lean on theirs quite a bit for developing ours. But the complaint I've heard from developers and our development staff is that the state code kind of keeps increasing at a fast enough rate that it's kind of hard to stay ahead with the definition of high performance that's meaningfully higher than a state code, without just making it like passive house essentially, which we do have an incentive for, but we also have a lower tier of high performance that everybody has to adhere to, with some rare exceptions. So that's just been a challenge. Like it's great that the state of Vermont is incentivizing it. We just have had trouble making our buildings kind of meaningfully different than the market.
Yeah, good point.
So I'll jump in because the district has probably the highest standard in the country is what I would say. The council just recently passed a bill that would have required all of our projects to be net zero starting this year. So we are rapidly trying to catch to that. What we have found, and to the way we've thought about it, is to look at specific provisions that are not included as part of the energy code to incentivize those. And then also to a lot of the energy code is focused on the new construction, and even substantial rehab, there's a lag there. And so that's where we've been focusing too, is how do you provide incentives all the way down So that like even if our energy performance standards focus on 50,000 square feet and above, so we can differentiate the points based on where the code is incentivizing folks to go and where it's not, and try to be different. So I think it's getting really granular. So we have a menu of options that projects can select to get points based on specific targets that may not be as part of your energy code.
Thanks, Joe. There's a question here on points typically added for solar. Mama, I think you presented on renewables, so I hate to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you happen to recall, or if anybody here on the call who does have solar incentives that QAP wants to help respond to that question. How many points are typically added?
It varies based on like how they're approaching solar, whether it's just like installing solar panels, the PV, or if it's like how they're going to offset energy for the building. But in some cases it's 2 points, in some cases it's 3, or it's 1. It just depends on how exactly solar is being incorporated into the project. But in the info brief that we're going to be sharing later this fall, we'll have a more detailed analysis of like state by state.
This is Tony. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, our QAP, the way we treat solar is we provide 1 point if you the developer is covering, the solar's covering their common areas. They get 2 points if they're covering the common areas in the site, and you get 3 points if you're covering the entire the building. So that's how the points are set up. And you can use a combination of rooftop solar with like community solar to achieve that. So that's how we award our points. So we also have several point structures for different levels of energy efficiency as well. Hitting in our state, we tie our energy efficiency levels to the what do you call it? The utility company has a program, a building incentive program, and their RNC Tier 2 program is basically net zero ready. It's probably about 40% better than code build out. And if you hit that standard with Energy Star, you get 2 points as well. So you can get a bunch of points between getting to a higher level of energy efficiency and solar, and you get additional points if you get into an actual net zero building or passive house. So I think it's like 7 points total or something like that.
And what state are you again? Sorry.
I'm Rhode Island, sorry.
Right, thank you.
And there's a comment in the chat from Phil that Virginia added up to 10 points for renewable energy systems, aka solar. And so just noticing those difference in points from what we just heard from Rhode Island, and I think all of you know this, but you know, each QAP is structured so differently that just the raw number of points in Rhode Island might be very different than what 10 points in Rhode Island might mean a very different thing for the QAP than 10 points in Virginia. So we have found it's really hard to make that comparison of just number of points because there are so many other factors, including total number of points available, you know, negative points. If you do this, you qualify for these points or you don't type of thing, that we found that to be a difficult sort of apples to oranges comparison.
There's also a question from Emily a little further up, asking if anyone tracks data on the impact to upfront costs to include items like third-party standards and hand certification, because our state gets some pushback on these. Might be a question for like the other HFAs on the call.
I don't know if there's anyone from Colorado on, but I know that the HFA in Colorado did an analysis of electrification in affordable multifamily housing and some of the cost barriers and other challenges. And they presented that on one of the previous boot camp sessions, and that might have some useful information in terms of upfront costs. I can't remember exactly, but that's on our website, I believe, right, Madeline, a link to that report?
Yes. I'll pull the link and put it in the chat in just a second.
And I'll ask a question while you do that, Madeline. So what we've been able to capture through our analysis is, of course, what you all are already doing in your QAPs, whether in response to new resources made available to the IRA or not. And in many cases, we know that it's not, because these existed long before the Inflation Reduction Act did. But curious how, or if you are thinking about updating your QAP because of the availability of these resources through the Inflation Reduction Act. And if the answer is no, I'm curious as to why not, what those barriers are.
Laura, while people are thinking about that question, is it useful to touch a little bit on some of the recommended practices and how that, and some of the broad trends we're seeing there at CSHA that begin to sort of mirror some of the findings that we found, or that suggest trends and things that may be coming down the pike yet still? Sorry, put you on the spot with that.
Sure, and I don't have those in front of me, and I don't want to put Robert on this spot either. But as I'm sure you're all aware, so NCSHA publishes recommended practices in housing credit administration every few years, I'll say. And they're recently going through a pretty major update to those. I expect those to be, I'll say, published and released publicly at the conference next month, which we keep talking about. Included in there are what I'll call energy efficiency resiliency measures that NCSHA is recommending you all, as allocating agencies, integrate into your QAP. I think, let me pull it up to remind myself. I don't remember if there are any new ones related to energy efficiency and resiliency, sustainability, all of this in the recent update, but for a long time, NCSHA has included several recommendations in their recommended practices. And I'm sure you're all much more familiar with the details of those than I am, because I think they're pretty significant in influencing what you end up doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Laura, what was the question again? I didn't catch the very first part of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, Robert.
No, that's fine.
To put you on the spot here. But what, I don't remember the specifics of which recommended practices touch on these topics around energy efficiency, sustainability, resiliency, whether old ones that have been in previous versions of those recommended practices, or if there are new ones as you're updating them. Again, I think with the expectation that those are released publicly at your conference next month.
Yeah, I'm not privy to the discussions related to the new ones.
Okay.
And those are discussions that are sort of ongoing, I think, coming to their conclusion. I can't promise that they'll be released by our annual conference, but I will drop, I believe this is the most recent iteration. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but you can see there are in there a number of sustainable development and other kinds of considerations that are included in the previous iteration.
I'll try to give an example of how we've adapted, and then I think how it plays back to the solar question too, and then to the solar for all that's coming. So with the ITC has to be sold to the federal LIHTC buyer traditionally, like they have to go to the same entity in terms of, and so as the ITC has increased as part of the IRA, it's become more important for us to have the proper setup in terms of who is the ultimate end buyer and underwriting that credit correctly. So we've integrated that into our QAP in order to make sure that the projects can maximize the amount of the ITC coming through the IRA. Now, the Solar for All program is about to launch. We've started talking with our energy agency here. What we're being told from them is the grant for the solar for all can be the entire cost of the solar plus 20% for other directly solar related amounts. But that's in addition to the credit, in addition into the LIHTC that can be generated from it. So when we're talking, you're looking at up to 225%, maybe 245% of the cost of solar that can be provided to the project. So for us, solar became a requirement as soon as we heard we could get a affordable housing source from the installation of solar panels. And so it's sort of our QAP adapted immediately to try to capture as much of that additional value. And so rather than having it for points, it became a requirement. So I think that's how we're trying to track down as each of our, we have the DC Green Bank, our Department of Energy and Environment, as they launch the programs, try to get ahead of it so that we could adjust the QAP to catch all those benefits.
Awesome. Any other last minute questions or comments?
I'll just point people to, what's a small conversation in the chat. So about these total number of QAP points. Jack, I think from New Hampshire, correct me if that's wrong, Jack, asking, okay, thanks, what the total number of points are in Virginia, understanding that it's not the same across states. Phil says it's 400 for 9% and 300 for 4%, but sees most 9% applications coming in at mid 500s, even up to 600. How does that compare, Jack, in New Hampshire to the total number of required points?
I wish I knew the answer to that, but I've got to go tap my colleagues down the hall because I've never had any involvement in the QAP process.
Noted. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't often look at total QAP points either. So I don't know if this 400, 300, if that's an average or not. My sense is that it really varies pretty wildly between states.
I suspect ours are somewhere between 100 and 200.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Phil. It's a weird scoring system that we have. A lot of that comes from efficient use of resource calculations, which is a whole other thing, but we're kind of looking to do a deep dive into our QAP over the next year anyway. And a lot of this kind of might be reset.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe that's part of why we haven't NHT hasn't dug into that, because it is very complicated. To your point, Phil, there's a lot of different nuances and factors that affect total number of points in ranking, and it's not always just adding up points.
Yeah, just so you let Rhode Island, this is Rhode Island again. I'm looking at my QAP now. Our total points is 138, and you can accrue up to almost 14 points in the energy sustainability category. So that's why developers go after that pretty aggressively. But there's some other things in there other than energy, So,
yeah, that is a lot. 14 out of 130.
Yeah, that's what it says in the QAP. Yep.
So in Minnesota, ours topped out at 160 points this year. That was the most we saw claimed. And for enhanced sustainability, which you can claim a couple different categories there, the most points we give out is 6. So 6 out of 160 for scale.
Moha, you had one last comment on QAPs.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of close out and say, as an organization like NHT, we recognize the value of the partnership that we have with HFAs, and a lot of this QAP analysis work that we do is to help you and support your agencies to better serve the needs of your affordable housing residents, and to support quality housing in your communities and your jurisdictions. And so at the top of this discussion, I know Danielle mentioned that we have done this QAP analysis on energy and water efficiency, and we shared some highlights today with you all. We've also looked at preservation topics and looking also at tenant protections. But obviously want to just share that there are some infographics about all of those that are going to be coming out later in the fall and maybe early next year, sort of deep dive into each of those different topics. And also that the door is open. If there are any threats or issues that you're seeing arise in your states, or any questions that you have, to be like, hey, we really want to think about how we're incentivizing or requiring X topic or Y topic, to, you know, reach out to NHT. We're happy to share the knowledge that we have, or even sort of support your agencies and dig into what your partners are doing, because we also recognize that you guys, you know, are doing a lot and may not always have the capacity to see what your peers are looking at. And that's one way that we can support the great work that you guys are doing. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you guys have any other questions about QAPs.
Thanks, Moha. I'll move on just to a couple reminders that we have. So I think this is like our fourth plug of the call about our in-person session at NCSFA's camp conference in October. But it's Sunday the 15th from 2:45 to 4:45 at the Sheraton, where the conference is going to be held that week. If you are attending the conference and want to come to our in-person session, we have an RSVP. I just sent the link in the chat. This is open to all bootcamp participants. So if you maybe aren't going to the conference, but you have colleagues from your agency who are, they are more than welcome to attend. There's a question or a box in the form that you can add in, like any topics or questions you may have that you want covered. We want this to be as beneficial to you all as possible. There'll be snacks and drinks, so hopefully that's a good reason to come as well. And then CPC, who presented at a previous session, agenda for the session will be based on, we'll be talking about some different things focused on, you know, some peer learning from HFAs, but a lot of that final agenda will come from what you share in the RSVP form. So if there's something specific you want to talk about, you can drop it in there, Rachel. And then CPC is hosting a webinar on Friday from 2 to 3 regarding what they're hoping to do with funding from EPA. So if you are interested in that and kind of putting some input, or just, you know, hearing how they want to support HFAs, you can register for the webinar here. There's also a few links that Todd mentioned in his earlier presentation that we'll be sharing out in a follow-up email for another webinar, and then just some resource links. And expect a newsletter from us coming out this week as well. And then regarding upcoming sessions, yes, the October 15th session in person in Boston. October 25th will be a joint session with our owners and developers focused on engaging residents and how we can center them in program design and implementation of IRA funding and retrofits. And then a second session on DOE rebates will be coming later in the fall. So we'll share that date when we have it. But if there are no other questions or comments, we can go ahead and end for the afternoon. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Madeline.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.